Okay. Can start? Okay. So, good morning, namaskar to all of you. It's a privilege and pleasure for me to start today's webinar on Mahatma Gandhi's Legacy and Global Peace, organized by Mizoram University, Aizawl, India. And this webinar, we have uh, Professor Priyankar Upadhyay, about whom I'll speak a little. Before that, let me also announce that Mizoram University has been organizing a host of webinars, including for Mahatma Gandhi to celebrate the extended 150 years of birth of Gandhiji over a period of 2 years. And in recent past, we have had so many webinars on different facets of Gandhism, and Gandhian ideas. Only for the last day, maybe it is predestined that we have something on legacy of Gandhi and global peace. And for this, we have this particular seminar, webinar, in which, let me introduce my guests. We have Professor K.R.A. Sambasiva Rao, Vice Chancellor, Mizoram University, as the chief guest. What about Professor Rao? He is such well known now that he is our guide, our mentor, and the person who leads us from the front. We have Professor Priyankar Upadhyay, who is the UNESCO chairholder for Peace and International Understanding at BHU, Banaras, India, and he is also associated with Malabya Center for Peace Research in that university. He is for the Peace Research Institute, Oslo, Norway, as the Global Fellow. And Professor Upadhyay, if I go on talking about his CV, it will take the entire webinar. But I must tell that he has his MPhil and PhD from JNU, and he is postdoctoral from London University and Woodrow Wilson Center for International Scholars, Washington, D.C. He has two diplomas from Uppsala University, Sweden, and he has been one senior Fulbright Fellow, and he has been associated with so many universities in India and world regarding peace research and peace studies. And we can safely call Professor Upadhyay one of the pioneers in peace research and studies in India and abroad. And Professor Upadhyay has a number of chairs. He has held a number of different academic assignments, and also among that, he was the ICCR chair of Indian Studies in Dublin, Ireland, and he has been one of the most important Indian academics in India and abroad, including United States, in European Union, and in many other countries, including in African countries. He has successfully completed a number of research projects, and a few of them, they belong to the peace coexistence, traditional versus non-traditional competition mechanism that is ongoing. Then in Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, peace building, diversity, and human security. And he is associated with so many research activities, academic activities in India and abroad. So if I continue to do that, Sir has told, please don't tell those things, but it's my proud privilege to speak a few words about Professor Priyankar Upadhyay, for whom we are so happy today that at least Professor Upadhyay could make it, and we can have the concluding webinar of 150 years of Gandhiji. With me, we have Professor Bhanlal Chwana, Professor Economics, Mizoram University, our present FO as the co-organizer. We have Professor J.K. Patnaik, our Honorable Pro Vice Chancellor. We have, as Honorable VC sir told, so many professors with us, and all the participants in India and abroad. So with these few words, it is now my privilege to request our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Rao, as the chief guest and as the Vice Chancellor, to speak a few words. Then after that, Professor Upadhyay. Sir, please.
Yes, sir. Good morning, sir. Good morning, Upadhyay, sir, and all the participants. A very good morning. It was a wonderful day. The very eminent speaker, Sir Upadhyay from Banaras Hindu University. Sir, your student is also here in our along with me. Now he was sitting, Mr. Jangu, he was sitting with me, and he was telling very nicely about you, how good you are, and how a sound researcher in Banaras Hindu University. It was a coincidence that we had a very wonderful personality to speak about Mahatma Gandhi legacy, and also the peace, world peace, his role in world peace. It was, I know very little about Mahatma Gandhi ji, though I know Mahatma Gandhi ji since my childhood, reading in many textbooks. But the real depth knowledge actually have been learning nowadays after listening to many people who are giving webinars in the past 2 months. I've been listening very wonders of Mahatma Gandhi ji. And Mahatma Gandhi ji was well respected, and also well that is very well known throughout the world for his non-violence and also satyagraha movements. And even before coming to India, even as a small barrister, he has been experienced the so many hurdles during his stay at South Africa, and he could grow as a leader of non-violence, and the non-violence movement and satyagraha has been started in South Africa when he was supporting the workers came from migrated to South Africa, and when they are facing a lot of difficulties in surviving there, in having a shelter, in having education, in having minimum facilities, and in having minimum wages in South Africa, when they are been suffering, Mahatma Gandhi has risen to the rescue of those people who are suffering in South Africa. And more than 2 lakhs of population who are migrated from India as workers to South Africa by British rulers, and they were not being given proper opportunity for settlement in South Africa. The leader has been born among the people, and he himself started, and he left his job as barrister, and he has fought against the British rulers, and by starting the non-violence and satyagraha movement in South Africa. And he continued the same after 24 years of stay in South Africa, came to India, and he led the non-violence movement in India, and he was the man actually saw the independence of India, and whole world actually knows about his commitment for world peace and the non-violence and satyagraha movement. The whole world was actually being taught how it can be fought to the rulers and dictatorial leaders. So it was a great leader for India, and India is one of the countries where leaders like Mahatma Gandhi were born in the country like India, and we are very much proud of him, and we are very much highly indebted to him for giving a country like India now, which we are enjoying all in these years. And it is a great occasion that you are gracing this occasion on October 2nd, Mahatma Gandhi. We just celebrated his birthday along with Lal Bahadur Shastri ji. Lal Bahadur Shastri ji is also born on the same day, but because of the great leader of Mahatma Gandhi ji, his birthday was seconded to him, but he was also one of the great leaders ever produced by India. And we celebrated both the birthdays just now, and we completed that particular one, and we are joining your webinar, sir. We are very anxious to listen to you, and being a peace leader in institute where you are heading in BHU, and you can also be called as Mahatma Gandhi of BHU. And thank you very much, and we welcome you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Uh, Thank you so much for your
Okay,
very
sir,
kind.
just a minute, sir. Professor Upadhyay, just a minute. So I must thank our Honorable Vice Chancellor. Only one word from our side as introducing the topic. Today is International Non-Violence Day. Today is the birthday of Mahatma Gandhi, also of Lal Bahadur Shastri, who is otherwise known as the Shanti Dut or the messenger of peace. So what more we can expect on a day when Professor Priyankur Upadhyay will talk about Mahatma Gandhi's legacy and global peace. Sir, now we can start. Time is yours.
Thank you so much, Professor Pati, for your kind words. Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor KRS Samba Rao, for a very lovely and lively, I should say, lovely and lively preface to Mahatma Gandhi's. We have already started walking with him on the tracks of Mahatma Gandhi, starting with South Africa to India. And thank you so much, Professor Rao, and Professor Pati and rest of all the colleagues here for bringing me here. I would also like to address Professor Srinivas Pati, along with Professor Srinivas Pati, Professor Banan Shauna. I took time to learn to how to correctly pronounce his name, and I think I can pass with 33% of marks. So him and also the Pro Vice Chancellor, Professor Patnaik, and all the galaxy of scholars, students, colleagues, and Gandhi belongs to everybody. So everybody who has joined this webinar, my greetings from Kashi, from Varanasi, and from Banaras. So, we go by many names. So it's a privilege to join together in this very important historic day when we conclude the 150th year of Mahatma. And also, as the Honorable Vice Chancellor said, we also commemorate the birth anniversary of Lal Bahadur Shastri, who actually belonged to Banaras, my city. I mean, his house, his home, his initial years were spent in a place that is hardly a few hundred meters away. And when we were mentioning him, I used to told many times as I came to Banaras years ago that he used to cross about almost 1 kilometer of river by simply swimming to reach his workplace. So from there he rose to become the prime minister. So what more? So he is the real Gandhi, Mr. Vice Chancellor. I I can never see myself in Gandhian path. Gandhi is very difficult to follow, as we all know, and we'll be talking about him. But it's a pleasure, always a pleasure, to read about Gandhi, to think about Gandhi, and to share about Gandhi. It's a sheer delight. And so Gandhi, I always tell myself and my students that Gandhi kind of inspires new thinking. Gandhi never gets stale. And that's the reason we see that perhaps world over, he is one Indian whose popularity has never ever waned. I mean, we will come to why this is so a little bit. And it's really a pleasant surprise for all of us. Wherever we go in the world, I tell you, wherever we go, we will very soon are bound to find a road named after him or Gandhi's bust, whether it is the United Nations, whether or Geneva, and more importantly, UNESCO, where I work very closely with the UNESCO headquarters in Paris. The first bust that you notice getting into this historic iconic building is that of Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi gives us identity. If India were ever to be known uh, for one iconic figure of the past, of course, there are a lot of people who are trying to do a lot of things for this country, and it will be exceptional on my part to miss any name or to take any name. But Mahatma Gandhi is the original Indian who brought India to the global limelight in 20th century. He was one amongst, I mean, there are many figures, Rabindranath Tagore, and you name it, big scientist, etc., etc. But Mahatma Gandhi is truly Mahatma Gandhi. And then one starts appreciating what Einstein had famously said about Gandhi. I know it's a very popular and often oft repeated statement that generation to come will scarcely believe that is such a man as one, that is Gandhi, walked upon this earth ever in flesh and blood. When as a child I would read this, I would not understand why Einstein said so. But today, when I look back, I understand why Einstein said so. Because perhaps Gandhi is very difficult to attain. He offers us ideas, he offers us grand visions, but it's not easy to follow his foot track. And the entire humanity, and I will build up my case of peace through that. If you looks at the entire humanity, one notices that whereas Gandhian ideals are still the best ideals, his prescriptions are the best, The road that he walked is absolutely unprecedented and very unique, but still Gandhi is very difficult to follow. 12 years after our independence, and a decade after, more than a decade after Gandhi, we lost Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., who incidentally, and all of us know, he's known as the American Gandhi or US Gandhi or the Junior Gandhi. So Martin Luther King Jr. Uh, came visiting India, and for a long time, he spent about 6 weeks in India. And at the end, he was overwhelmed. He went to all places where Gandhi was born, Gandhi lived, Gandhi worked. And as he was taking his flight back, a very cynical journalist asked him an iconic question. And the question was, Mr. King, please tell us, where is Gandhi today? We don't see him anywhere. This was just 10 years after independence, or if you want to be precise, 12 years. A yog, 12 years is a yog in our Hindu understanding, had gone. And Gandhi looked at him and he said, look, Gandhi is inevitable. Gandhi is inevitable. And if humanity is to survive, Gandhi is inescapable. And we might ignore him, but if we do so, we'll be doing it only at the risk and the peril of our civilization. And we are seeing it so aptly today. 6 decades have gone since Martin Luther King had this exchange and the cynical question, where is Gandhi today? And after 6 decades also, we lament the, our collective failure of our civilization and humanity to translate Gandhian ideas into practice. And as a result, what we see today is much greater violence, both direct and indirect, all over the world. Dissonance, disaffection. I mean, you bring it, you name it. I mean, could we ever imagine? And I don't want to be political, this is just a very inane kind of thing. We just had this debate, the greatest debate, the presidential debate in the United States, the greatest democracy as it is known as. And look at the disaffection, the anger, the disconcerted dialogues that echoed. So people are angry. That's 60 years after Martin Luther King said that if the civilization has to survive, it has to take recourse to what Gandhi had to say. Now, in so many respects, Gandhi, the world has reached the precipice, as we call it. Precipice in the sense, after this, there is deluge. After this, there is total destruction. If you look at the worsening ecological crisis, I mean, every now and then the scientist, the activist warn us about the worsening ecological crisis and how the world, our nature is being depleted, destroyed on our quest of consumerism. If we look at the rising scale of structural violence, indirect violence, if we look at terrorism and the inequitable result of globalization, oftentimes we look at globalization and sometimes we lament what kind of globalization? Is it a globalization of misery? And today what we see is a globalization of pandemics. I mean, earlier times, perhaps, we were better off when we were not so connected. This connectedness has done what good to us? So these questions are coming up time and again to us. And needless to say that the global peacefulness has degenerated over past decades and years. I need to remind ourselves that after the Second World War got over, the United Nations was erected, and we thought, all right, the world is now safe. We have United Nations, we have democracy, people would live happily ever after. The Second World War has come to an end. But what happened? Soon after we got into the throes of Cold War. And then if you look at the end of Cold War. When the end of Cold War came, we were once again proclaimed that, look, now the disease of conflict is gone. Peace has come finally. But that's not so. After the Cold War, and I do this peace research, we study peace in a more scientific, methodological manner, not simply as a philosophy. And scores of data suggested that more lives were lost ever in the humanity in the 2 decades after the end of the Cold War. Almost 150, or what should I say, 15 million people lost their lives in conflict and violence that were known as civil violence. Just to give you an example, nearly a million people lost their lives 94 Rwanda, inter-ethnic, inter-violence conflict. And the situation didn't improve at all. I mean, the Cold War, no Cold War. And today, I mean, when this COVID-19 pandemic broke out and it threatened the entire civilization and humanity, the Secretary General of the United Nations said it in so many words. Look, at least today, tomorrow, as long as we have this pandemic, don't engage in conflict. Don't resort to violent means. Save your energy to fight this menace, which is the worst in the annals of human history. But did we pay any attention? No. The terrorism continues. The wars between countries, the militarization, military preparedness is very much heightened today. I mean, there is for many of us who, uh, there's a global peace index, GPI, which calculates every year the amount of resources lost in the preparedness, military preparedness, war, weaponry, etc. In 2019, the calculation is, and it's staggering. It's not one of those peace snicks and philosophers talking you in euphoric terms. Just look at the data. In 2019, $14.5 trillion in purchasing power parity were spent in militarization, weaponization, and preparedness, military type preparedness were lower. This figure is equivalent to 10.6% of world's economic activity. That is the gross world product of $1,909 per person, in other words. I mean, if we simplify it, every individual on this planet Earth is spending rupees 1.4 lakhs on weaponry. And mind you, 1.4 lakhs is the annual average income of an Indian. So look at the enormous resources, look at the enormous efforts that are going into this. Now, this is the world that we live in. And yet, we remember Gandhi. Yet, we not only remember, somewhere, all of us, across the world, across the globe, there is this eerie feeling that we have to walk his way, whether it is Gandhi's walk against consumerism, whether his walk for, the environmentalism. And that's where I think every time I participate in these webinars, why I lament, why I feel frustrated. And I ask each one of us here to have a deep look within. What simple advice of Gandhi? Just try to think, have we followed any of the advice? And if not, this is the time to do so. This is not cynicism. This is a practical hope. You know, as Mr. Vice Chancellor pointed out, Gandhi lived long in South Africa. He came to India very late, and one of the places he came first was Banaras Hindu University, and we'll talk about a little bit about it. But by the way, Gandhi remained as an NRI till he was 21 years old. I mean, I'm just saying how quickly he absorbed the Indian reality. And Gandhi in his life just wrote 2 books. Do we know this? One is Swaraj and the other is My Experiments with Truth. And yet there is no aspect of planetary life. There is no aspect of human beings. There is no aspect of India that remains untouched by his very practical philosophy. And when I talk to my youngsters, my students, my friends, and to myself, and I tell them, I said, try to be 1% Gandhi in your own personality, and you will see that the world is changing. The reason, if you look at You see, Gandhi is enormous literature, and by no means I don't consider myself owe any expertise on Gandhi, because Gandhi cannot be expertised on. Gandhi can be lived. Gandhi's peace was experiential. Gandhi's life was learning, and he kept on evolving constant reforms in his life. I mean, like so many thinkers, Gandhi was very fond of saying, "Bring me the contrary vision tomorrow morning, and I will change my opinion." He was so open. I mean, in one of his addresses to the students, he was asked that the student said that, "Tell us one line," and he said, "Discover the simplest of truth yourself. Satya ka anvishan swayam kijiye." Discover the truth yourself. This is the only thing I have to tell you. So Gandhi did it himself. And look at, man is the measure. He said, forget about the world. We are always worried about others, what others are doing, countries are doing, people are doing. Look at your own self. And then, on the basis of his ideas, this very famous Obama statement came into popularity when Obama said, "Be the change you wish to bring." Actually, Gandhi never said it in so many words, but Gandhi said it in so many occasions, in so many ways. Be the change you wish to bring. So, constant reforms. And another thing he said, which especially to younger generation, I keep on saying, there is nothing harm in living. There's no, I won't prescribe austerity, although my father, Sanskrit scholar and a very renowned professor, lived with a few khadi ki dhoti and kurta and a topi all his life. And he was not a Sanskrit professor in that sense. He was a mathematics and English honors of Allahabad University and a presidential award winner. So I know his life. He lived his life very well. He was a very senior professor. And I have seen that, but I couldn't follow it. And I don't want to prescribe it. But simple living and high thinking. Now, this is something that may come to us very easy. And that's what Lal Bahadur Shastri also did, if you notice. We could do it if not entirely. This craze for brands, consumerism, buying till you dying, shop till you drop. I think that's where the circuit of violence begins in our lives. That's where we destroy our ecology. That's where we destroy. Now, then another simple line, and these things are known to everybody. Earth has enough for human needs, but not for human greeds. How simply he said it. I mean, why do you want to possess more than what you have? It's a tough line to adopt. I tell you, it's so difficult. In your own family life, in your own life, it's not easy. But this is not utopia. I mean, one of the challenges that we have in peace studies, peace research, and talking about Gandhi is that oftentimes we reject them. Oh, this is idealism. This is utopia. This is euphoric. No, my dear, this is the only recipe for survival. This is the most pragmatic kind of thing that can happen. Peace is not a utopia. And I will tell you a little bit about the war and its consequences, but after telling what Gandhian methodology was. So, truth and nonviolence. And then, very wisely, Gandhi was himself a deeply religious person. But he was also deeply religious in loving and accepting all religions, sarva dharma sambhav. And he was very fond of saying that, well, I don't talk about tolerance to me. I don't like this term tolerance. He said tolerance means as if you are tolerating somebody, some bad odor, some bad smell, somebody you don't want to look. He says celebrate diversity. He said celebrate differences. So this is Gandhi was always up there. And of course, Swachhata Hi Seva. I mean, he was, you see, look at the range, 21 years abroad, then South Africa. He was a barrister, by the way. And he came with, was initially photographed impeccably dressed and what, my God, he can't be, nobody can be as Western and as polished as Gandhi was. And he left everything. But after leaving everything, he still talked about Swachhata, Seva. One of the episodes that was very touching, and I never thought I'll mention it here, but in a way it talks about things. When he went to Champaran, and it was an excellent visit, and the very interesting ways in which he went to Champaran. And so he had a couple of people, very poor people, who would come to assist him and to do things, and they will sit here. One day, Gandhi told his wife that why don't you ask his wife to put on clean clothes at least every day they should put on clean clothes. Sometimes we see that their clothes are not properly. What is the problem? Go and tell them the lesson of Swachhata. So Ba goes there and comes back crying. He says, Mahatma, I don't know how she addressed him. He said, those people have just one set of clothes. And so question of when they return after days toil, then they wash it and wear it next day. And Gandhi understood that Swachhata is not simply about putting on new clothes. Swachhata then relates to other issues. Swachhata relates to human development. Swachhata relates to Atmanirbharta. Swachhata relates to caring for the poor. And that's where he said that if you want an answer, correct answer, if you are ever in any confusion, for God's sake, go to that last man. And that is the talisman, he said. Daridra Narayan, go to the last man who is deprived and ask him if this policy, this thing. You see, all these ideas, one thing, couple of things, then I will shift the gear and go in fast track. Time is gradually deserting me. See, Bhudan, Gramdan, Ramarajya, Shanti Sena. Do we remember what he said? Not many, a lot of people have seen Gandhi's films and read and they celebrate Gandhi. They don't know that Gandhi wanted to wage peace as a war. He talked about Shanti Sena. He said, let us have a dedicated group of workers who would work for the peace, the community peace, and so on and so forth. Jai Jagat, borderless world. He was a great nationalist, Gandhi. He loved India. He loved every bit. He loved our self-respect. At the same time, he was wise enough to see that one of the major causes of conflict world over is over the territorial border. He said, let's visualize a world which is borderless. And that kind of resonates so well with the idea of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, if you please. So you see all these ideas. Gandhi was a grand thinker. He could think in a very wide framework. His Wantanschung, if you need a German philosophical term, was so complete. And where did he learn? He learned from life. He learned from everyday experience. He learned from real people. And that's how his grand theory, like in 2015, the Sustainable Development Goals were proclaimed, and sustaining peace, sustainable development goals. And I remember because I was doing a massive project with UNESCO at that time, and I used to join the debates virtually or practically in General Assembly. I have been there. Many a times people will mention Gandhi. Gandhi would connect environment, urban situation, poverty, peace, justice, women, all together. And that's where Gandhi's peace was not simply the absence of war. And I will come to that a little in a fast forward manner. But let me tell you two most potent contributions which Gandhi made and which should be used. Or it's very difficult, I say, to be a Gandhi in today's world. First is Gandhi was very upfront in saying that peace can only be achieved through peaceful means. If anybody thinks that non-peaceful methods and coercive methods can bring about sustainable peace, I think the history will prove him or her right or wrong. So this is one thing which is a very difficult task, and we can talk a little bit about it. And the second contribution was that of indirect violence. And let's talk a little bit quickly about non-violence today, as Honorable Vice Chancellor mentioned and Professor Pati mentioned, is the International Day of Non-Violence. Now, non-violence generally we see, in Indian tradition, in our own, and that's one of the lamentation that the Indian words and expressions are far more comprehensive. For us, for example, Shanti never meant absence of war. Shanti was more to do with the having harmony with nature, with harmony with yourself, harmony with the communities. Similarly, ahimsa is not a straight way cannot be translated as non-violence. For Gandhi, ahimsa was a trajectory to transform others through one's own suffering, as he very aptly used to call a surgery of soul. a surgery of soul. He appealed to the better instincts of opponents, activated his consciousness, broadened his mind and heart to bring him to an understanding, to a judgment. And those of us who go through Gandhian narratives would know how. And at the end, he was so clear about it. And this is something that I would like my young friends, colleagues, and researchers to keep in mind whenever they look at non-violence as something impractical. And Gandhi was very clear. And I quote him here. He said it so categorically. We are constantly being astonished, Gandhi said. We are constantly being astonished at the amazing discoveries in the field of violence. But, Gandhi says, I maintain that far more undreamt of and seemingly impossible discoveries will be made in the field of nonviolence. We haven't done so. We just conceded that, well, nonviolence doesn't work. It's not true. It's not true. That's what I feel. I mean, this is not an argument to give up arms and if there is terrorist strikes to do things, but always consider the possibility of using non-violence and realizing the potentials of dealing with conflict. Couple of more things before we go to the concluding sections. Now, one is, and it's very interesting, and I will, especially the younger generation, I would like all of us to consider this, that Gandhi was very upfront in saying that conflict is, there is nothing wrong in conflict. In fact, Gandhi used to celebrate conflict. He said, conflict allows us to know more about our opponent. I mean, it is the anonymity that kills peace. And Gandhi says that that's how I love conflict, because we discover that we have a relationship with one another. Once you discover this relationship, then this conflict can become really creative. And so Gandhi would love that kind of conflict situation. And this brings us very close to what in peace and conflict research we talk about: functional conflict, dysfunctional conflict. But mind you, conflict is about incompatibilities, about changes, differences, sign of democracy, sign of good health. But at the same time, conflict is not violence. Like one of the Nobel laureates who was responsible for many ways for the attainment of peace process in Northern Ireland, he wrote a primer on peace titled "What's Wrong with the Conflict?" Fine. But then that can't be said about violence. Violence is very damaging. And Gandhi would not accept any kind of violence on any ground. Now, one of the contributions, seminal foundational contribution Gandhi made was that of structural violence. And this structural violence is often attributed to the famous Scandinavian scholar Johan Galtung. And people, because we Indians, we forget our own contributions, and when the things comes back with a good Western packaging, we accept it. But early 90s, I had occasion, or in fact, late 80s, I had occasion of working for a long time with Johan Galtung, who is also rated as the founding father of peace studies. And he was very fond of me for reason, he was a big man. I was just a young lecturer with no credentials. He said, "You come from Varanasi." And Johan had spent about 2 months in sitting on the bank of the river Ganga and reading about Gandhi in Institute of Gandhian Studies, which was then established by Jayaprakash Narayan. Now it's in bad health for many decades, health maybe decades. And there, Johan Galtung picked up one sentence: hate the sin, not the sinner. Hate the sin, not the sinner. And then he questioned, then he saw how Gandhi looked at structural violence. And, uh, uh, and then he understood that violence is embedded in the structure. It is untouchability. It is the caste. It is so many barriers, these structures that, create this kind of problematic known as structural violence. In very simple words, If children are murdered, that's direct violence. If children die through abysmal poverty and starvation, that is structural. And if we don't accept it as violence, as for a long time we would not accept violence against women as violence, that is cultural violence. That there are ideologies which justify certain acts of violence. Legitimizing the indirect violence as legitimate, as acceptable, is what cultural violence. All these categories provide, they all came through Mahatma. And then Mahatma Gandhi was very, very particular about, and he talked many a times in his newspapers and writings or in his articulations, that everyday violence must be resisted. This everyday violence to him was how we speak, how we address others, how we treat others. Untouchability, of course, was a part of that. Fortunately, that's been legally and constitutionally prohibited, but still this scourge remains in our subliminal mindset. So Gandhi talked about, everyday violence. He talked about routine violence. And he said violence is not simply when America and Russia are fighting or India and Pakistan is fighting. Violence is also when we speak. He went to the extent, it's a beautiful quote, and I would go to my class, and every time, once I went and I said, when a teacher goes late to his classroom, he engages in violence. And my students once reminded me, sir, you are late. You have engaged in violence. And I told them that, look, Gandhi also said that students must attend the class with all their focus. And if they don't do it, that is also violence. So Gandhi, in other words, created a holistic vision of peacefulness in which planetary well-being, environment was included, in which indirect violence was included, and inner peace was included in Gandhi's thing. Perhaps many of us would know that Ernest Nies from Scandinavia, who gave this term deep ecology, for instance, it was entirely a draw from Mahatma Gandhi. One has to read Thomas Weber and his famous book. So, a lot of these wonderful things. And as a consequence, as I wind up, I see that, and I'll tell you another thing, we have lots of Gandhian centers and a few peace centers like what we have here. But I think Indians should pay greater attention to Gandhi. Indians should relate Gandhi not to simply to his philosophy of the past, but how do we use Gandhian frameworks to bring about that solace, that change, that happiness of our society. And many have done it. I mean, Ram Das, Mubarakabad, Thich Nhat Hanh, Cesar Chavez, Dalai Lama, Desmond Tutu, not to miss Nelson Mandela, John Baez, so many people from different cultures, they are doing it. And eventually, as I said, that the responsibility with us, because we are sitting and talking in a university system, the greatest responsibility is on us, that we should teach peace to young children and not so young children also. We need to talk about the real peace. We need to tell them that peace is not simply a philosophy. Peace is the everyday life. And Gandhi was very fond of saying, if you recall, and I know everybody recalls it, it's deeply buried over in subconscious, that peace is the way, there is no destination of peace. Peace is the way you live everyday life. And I think there is another thing that's, to me, it has become, out of so many other priorities, has become very important. And I feel that it's important to talk about this, the importance of non-violent communication. See, the expressions that are used in today's media, in today's university parlance, in newspapers, in television debates, that's at most violative of human dignity. And the United Nations has come out with new definitions of peace, sustaining peace, quality peace. And they say if human dignity is not taken care of, I think there'll be no peace. How do you care for human dignity if you don't care for using at least non violent expressions today's language has become so violent amongst youngsters and not so youngsters in media, that we need to also inculcate this whole notion of non-violent communication. And there are very interesting courses that are being sort of introduced in this regard. We need to look at peace in a much broader dimensions of just societies, inclusive societies, and also societies which believe in a culture of peace. And we have a special responsibility. We as teachers, we as students, we as activists, we have to do it. We don't have to wait for somebody else to come and do it. We can do it in our different smaller ways. World peace is not between what is happening Soviet Union and oh my God, I'm still in Cold War days in Russia and America or China is doing, or the borders. Borders are important, very important. They provide dignity to the people who live within it. At the same time, frontiers of people's dignity is also important. We need to protect the dignity of common people, address them politely. And I must share with you before I close that in my one casual visit during the Christmas holiday, Professor Padi, you were not there, and so was my very dear student, Dr. Sualal. We visited Aizol, and one of the things that struck me was the tremendous decency with which people will address each other, the tremendous organized discipline through which they will park their vehicles on the road. And I told my wife, who's also a professor, we both discussed, he said, if we have to settle at some place at some point of time in future, we will come and stay here. There is so much of peacefulness. And Mizoram is one place where they sorted out their problems so peacefully. So it's in today when this is a dismal global situation. World is overarmed, over 20,000 ready to go missiles, and 5 will destroy the world. World is overarmed and peace is underfunded. There are not many takers for peace. So at least we are grateful to Mahatma Gandhi, that it provides us an occasion to talk freely about peace. The clue, the punchline is peace is pragmatic. This is something that we need to remember in our own lives and for the globe as such. So thank you so much, Professor Pati, our very respected Honorable Vice Chancellor Rao, for giving me this opportunity. To all colleagues, and I must say something that, as you know, whether it is a Gandhi wave or not, we do a lot of webinars, lot of internet-based things. But, and this is also a notion, my wife, who's a professor of political science, she shared with me that whenever she listens to the webinars and dialogues conducted, carried out by Mizoram University, Aizol, she finds that they are the best. So my special word of gratitude to your ICT team. They warned me, they cautioned me, they advanced me. All the arrangements were perfect. So a special word of gratitude. And this is, I don't do it every time. None of time I have done. You are the best. And I'm sure under the lead of our present Vice Chancellor, the university will scale greater heights. And I will always be there for you people. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Sir, just one thing before we have a little bit question answer. As you rightly told that this is reading from the front, I told you, but one more important point, the small meeting we had, but this was referring to just before this webinar started, we have resolved that we will have a takeaway from that small meeting. We will have a Center for Gandhian Studies and Peace Research in this university, and for that we will take you as the mentor. You will be our mentor, you have decided, so kindly accept it. We will find the proposal and you will be our mentor. And this small bit, this will be the takeaway from this webinar and the meeting which just preceded this webinar. And sir, coming to the conclusion.
All
Okay.
blessings.
Yeah,
I will be there.
we'll be very
I will
happy.
be there on my own and help this initiative.
Okay, sir. I will be very happy to take your help, sir. And
Right.
then coming to a few questions, because you told already you are very busy, you have to go, but little bit of questions.
Oh,
One question
absolutely.
is, Gandhiji was accepting his own mistakes. and was correcting all the time. How this can be linked to conflict resolution by Gandhian perspective, taking to his own mistakes, accepting it and correcting it. What is your view? How can it help conflict resolution in our society or in general?
I think this is a great trajectory. And not simply because Gandhi would do it, but the conflict resolution literature, peace studies literature, gives us ample theorization to understand this. You see, humans are not perfect. And we will keep on making mistakes. But as long as you rectify them, reframe your position, I think there will be possibility of peace. One particular theory, you see, that of it's a very popular theorem, human need theory. You know, this basic human BHN, basic human needs. It argues that from time to time our basic needs change. Identity, security. We want something. Our perceptions, and the only thing, and we need to correct it every day. The Greeks were very rational, and still we give them highest priority to understand what a good life is. And one of their philosophers, I think Herodotus or somebody, who said, every day new sun, all is in flux. So if tomorrow morning, if you realize that a mistake has occurred and you are willing to retract it, I think that is the step towards dialogue. And I think that is where, because forgiveness, if you know, daya and forgiveness is very essential to conflict transformation. If we develop individually this capacity to forgive, I think most of our problems would be taken care of. We hurt each other through language, through sentiments. So, and Gandhi was very particular about this. He wouldn't take a second to apologize. I have seen my father, I lost him almost 12 years back, very senior academic, very Gandhian. But if there is a mistake, he will, apologize. It doesn't take you. You have to deal with your ego. And I think that is the recipe of peacefulness.
Okay, sir. Sir, one more question which is very often linked to Gandhian legacy, that if someone beats in one cheek, show the other. The question is, how relevant this dictum today? Somebody
See,
slaps, you show the other cheek.
there we in our language, Gandhi was actually, those who have read Gandhi correctly would know that Gandhi never accepted injustice. Gandhi never tolerated, he himself, I mean, this is a really controversial part of his life, joined the military service in certain capacity, probably a volunteer's capacity. See, Gandhi says this particular statement is often used by those who have never read Gandhi, who have never tried to walk with Gandhi. Gandhi says that non-violence is not cowardice. He's upfront on that. He says non-violence is an act of greatest bravery that people do. In most of the, like his entire argument is that we can avoid to be reactive. Many a times, if you don't react, the conflicts are resolved. I'm not referring, for example, in case of Pakistan is a rogue state, the terrorism or the border questions, we have different responses, and Gandhi never shunned from them. But in everyday life, I think the lesson Gandhi is giving us is that if you simply, take an eye for an eye, I think the whole world will become blind, as somebody said. So, as an ethos, it should balance your counter reaction spirit.
Okay, sir. So there is one more question. United Nations as the sentinel of global peace, how do you look at the future of United Nations as the world government or the global government in some near future?
See, I mean, only yesterday I was also, these are bad times for anybody who has any love for Gandhi. And somebody tried to grill me. He said, what is your United Nations done? They think that because I work with UNESCO. See, what is United Nations? It is your mirror. It is a platform of all the member states. It's not a different entity. It's not an avatar. It's not a somebody outside planet. It represents you. it mirrors you. And in today's situation, United Nations feels so belittled, so miserable. You know, United States has walked out of UNESCO. For 10 years, it doesn't give any grant. WHO, it has walked out. So multilateralism is the basis of United Nations, 190 plus countries getting together. This is the only platform. So right since 45 came Cold War, and today when Cold War came to an end, people said that now peace is coming. The United Nations, if I will simply ask one of these wonderful respondents and the participants here, just to click and read what United Nations documents are saying. They cannot be overambitious. Their Security Council is still belonging to those 5 countries who originally had nuclear powers. But why blame United Nations? They it mirrors you, it mirrors us. So unless the peace comes from within, unless we become peaceful, perhaps United Nations would remain well-meaning, great ideas, perhaps the only multilateral organization, but it will remain constrained. It cannot do anything on its own. It doesn't have money, it doesn't have sanction. So please be kind to United Nations. That's our only hope today in today's world, let me say.
Sir, one very brief question, but very loaded. The question is, what should we do as academics in putting Gandhism in the forefront of our curricula? So what will be your suggestion beyond Gandhian studies departments and centers? In general, what should be your suggestion how Gandhi and
Hello, 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 hello. Hello, hello.
Sir?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, let's hear.
yeah. Please continue. What
Yeah.
is your view regarding how can we put Gandhi and Gandhism in our curricula across the board beyond the Gandhian studies centers and Gandhian study per se? What will be your viewpoints?
You see, I will share. First of all, they should do what the Mizoram University, as all has done, Central University, have a focus center. See, the problem, and this is a very frank admission, and this irritates some of my colleagues and friends, is that most of the, hello, can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me? Hello, got disconnected. Hello, Professor Padi, can you hear me? Hello. Hello.
Yes.
Hello. Yes, sorry, I'll just quickly finish it. So one
Yeah,
of
yeah,
my
yeah.
expectation, I'll come to that, is that the
Hmm.
Gandhians say, see, let's stop only preaching Gandhi. Let's stop analyzing what Gandhi did decades ago. Let's use his methodology. Let's connect his methodology to contemporary issues. What is happening, unfortunately, in most of the Gandhi centers, and one reason why we never named our peace center on Gandhi, I said, look, they simply become a biography collection of Gandhi. We have heard Gandhi enough. Gandhi also never wanted to leave an ideology behind. We need to connect his methodology, his trajectories to contemporary issues and problems. And I think that is where I think we need to redo things. If you see most of the Gandhian centers, and many of them for different reasons have not been doing good. Some of them are, of course, doing good, let me admit that. But is that they come to the mainstream. Gandhi should not remain only confined to a building or to 2, 3 rooms or a few people who are churning out things about Gandhi, what did in Noakhali and Champaran, etc., etc. Gandhi should be brought in the 21st century. It should relate to public policy issues, it should relate to health issues, it should relate to United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Only then we can do justice to Gandhi and use him correctly. And precisely what is being done elsewhere in many countries I know and I work. So they don't stay with Gandhi's past, but they are interested in finding out what how Gandhian trajectories, environment, peacefulness, non-violence, education, Nai Talim, for example, Gandhi, beautiful ideas, and heart and this thing. So I think that is the, to my little understanding, that is the answer.
Okay, sir. So because you told that you are already very busy, so on behalf of the organizers, I say a heartfelt thanks to our Honorable Vice Chancellor Professor Rao and as guest speaker Professor Premkur Upadhyay, my co-hosts and colleagues. Only one sentence as the vote of thanks, let me tell. For sustainable peace, let us try to be at least 1% of Gandhi. This should be taken away from the speech, and let us feel that instead of only teaching, preaching, let us be at least 1% of Gandhi. Thank you so much. On behalf of the university, I again say my gratitude and thanks to all of you. Namaskar.
Namaskar, Padeji. Thank you so much for your kind words. And to all participants, let's keep in touch. Let's keep the hope
Sure,
alive and
sir.
let's work together. Let's live this life together. Thank you
Okay.
so much.
Okay. Namaste, sir. Namaste.